Sarah Ferguson is allegedly breaking down in hiding in the UAE after Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie reportedly cut her off. And the reason exploding across headlines is that the latest Epstein email leaks make it look like Fergie didn't just stay in contact with Jeffrey Epstein. She allegedly offered access to her own daughters to him while demanding money, sending batches of photos while drowning in debt. This isn't a story about awkward royal connections or naive friendships that crossed a line. This is a story about a mother whose desperation allegedly turned transactional and whose daughters may now be paying the price for finally understanding what that means. The emails that unravel everything. The emails that have resurfaced don't read like distant royal awkwardness. They read like dependency turning transactional. In August 2009, while Jeffrey Epstein was still serving time for soliciting a minor, Sarah Ferguson allegedly wrote to him, "Thank you, Jeffrey, for being the brother I have always wished for." That wasn't years before the conviction. That was during the fallout. So if anyone is trying to argue she was horrified and unaware, that line doesn't help. And it doesn't stop there. Emails from 2010 allegedly show her writing, "I am at your service. Just marry me." From brother to at your service to marry me. That progression is intimacy sliding into dependency. And then comes the message that made people recoil. You can marry her too. She is single and has a great body. Okay, well, marry me and then we will employ her. That wording surfaced in summaries of newly unsealed files, and it is why people are saying this wasn't just a friendship. It was transactional energy with a member of the royal family at the center of it. As if that wasn't enough, she allegedly congratulated Epstein on a baby boy, correspondence suggesting a level of personal alignment that goes far beyond social acquaintance. That is the kind of message you send someone you are deeply aligned with, not someone you are distancing yourself from. And then the emails turn toward the daughters, which is where this story becomes something far darker than a financial scandal. The daughters are brought into it. Emails show Ferguson allegedly referring to waiting for Eugenie, then 19 years old, to return from what she described as a shagging weekend. She wrote that to Epstein. That is not language you use with a distant acquaintance. That is someone comfortable sharing intimate personal details about her own child with a convicted sex offender. And just days after Epstein was released and placed on the sex offender registry in 2009, Ferguson reportedly took Beatrice and Eugenie to meet him. Other emails suggest Ferguson arranged for Epstein to pay for flights for herself and her two daughters. Flights totaling nearly $15,000, with business class for Fergie and economy for the girls. So when people say the daughters didn't know, the timeline complicates that defense immediately because this wasn't hidden from them. They were on those flights. They were in that house. The question of what they understood about who they were visiting and why they were being taken there is one that now hangs heavily over the entire family narrative. And the emails involving the daughters don't stop with Ferguson. Sources also reveal that Andrew sent Christmas photos of Beatrice and Eugenie to Epstein in 2011 and 2012, years after the conviction, despite publicly claiming he had cut contact. The daughters were being used as a form of ongoing communication, a way of maintaining warmth and connection with a man both parents were supposedly distancing themselves from publicly while privately treating him like extended family. The financial desperation behind it all. To understand why this happened, you have to understand the financial reality Sarah Ferguson was living in. Reports detail a £6 million debt crisis at the time, with Ferguson discussing selling jewelry, seeking billionaire bailouts, and allegedly telling Epstein she felt so demoralized that death felt easier than her financial situation. When someone is drowning financially and a man like Epstein is positioned as a pillar and a legend, a benefactor with bottomless resources and no apparent conditions, you start to see why proximity might become currency. Ferguson's charity has since reportedly shut down amid the fallout from these revelations. Her public standing has collapsed. And the money that once seemed to flow from these connections is long gone. But the emails remained. And the emails show a woman who was not just friendly with Epstein, but who was actively leveraging her position, her access, and apparently her family to maintain a financial relationship with him. The most chilling line in all of this is one that allegedly resurfaced alongside the financial correspondence. Sarah allegedly told Epstein, "No woman has ever left the royal family with her head." That wording sounds like a warning. And the second it resurfaced, people started asking the obvious question. Was she thinking about Princess Diana? Because if someone inside the system is casually writing that no woman leaves with her head, you start wondering what leaving really costs. You start wondering what staying cost as well. The photos and the broader pattern. Buried in the same tranche of documents are emails referencing Ghislaine Maxwell, joking that 5 stunning redheads would have to play with themselves if Andrew didn't visit the island. Andrew referred to himself as the invisible man in that exchange. There is also a statement from a 25-year-old masseuse who said she didn't feel good being asked to massage Andrew because she thought she might be expected to do more. That statement sits in the files too. It doesn't prove guilt, but it adds atmosphere to a picture that is already deeply troubling. And then there are the photographs. Images released in the Epstein files reportedly show Andrew crouching over a woman lying on the floor, staring directly at the camera, hand placed on her stomach. Another image shows him reclining across women at Sandringham. These images have no captions, no dates, no explanatory context, but their existence in Epstein's files is a statement in itself. They were in his possession. They were part of his collection. And that alone raises questions that no amount of palace silence can answer. The BBC replayed a photo from Beatrice's 18th birthday in 2006. Epstein, Maxwell, and Harvey Weinstein all present at a royal residence for a masked ball. Nobody was blinking at the times. Which is why the sudden outrage about these connections feels selective to some observers. Epstein wasn't on the periphery of this family. He was receiving family updates, being invited to birthday celebrations, and being treated as a trusted insider even after his conviction. The idea that anyone was truly unaware of how embedded he had become strains credibility. Queen Elizabeth's alleged involvement. And then comes the detail that reframes everything about how the royal family has handled this from the beginning. Reports claim the late Queen allegedly lent Andrew £7 million as part of the settlement with Virginia Giuffa, with the total settlement reportedly reaching £12 million, drawing contributions from multiple members of the royal family. When money repeatedly rescues scandal, it creates insulation. But insulation doesn't erase email trails. It doesn't erase photographs. It doesn't erase the documented pattern of behavior that is now part of the permanent public record. King Charles has been publicly heckled with the question, "How long have you known about Andrew and Epstein?" It is a question that the palace has never adequately answered. And as each new tranche of documents emerges, the gap between what was known privately and what was disclosed publicly grows harder to defend. The institution protected itself through money and silence for years. Now the emails are doing the talking instead. The fracture with the daughters. If Ferguson is truly isolated now not by the press but by her own daughters, then this isn't just scandal. It is collapse from within. Beatrice and Eugenie are parents now, raising children of their own. And through that lens, the 2009 trips to Epstein's home look entirely different. They don't look like naive family visits organized by a mother who misjudged a friendship. They look like calculated proximity. They look like children being used as props in a financial negotiation with a convicted sex offender. Posts circulating online say the daughters were adults in their 20s who allegedly gave tour of royal residences to people connected to Epstein. That is why the innocence narrative isn't landing with everyone. But there is another version of events that is equally troubling. Perhaps Beatrice and Eugenie were genuinely unaware of the full nature of what their mother was doing. Perhaps they were taken to that house not knowing who Epstein really was or what the visit was really about. If that is the case, then the realization that their mother leveraged proximity to them for financial gain is a betrayal of the most fundamental kind. Reports also indicate that Beatrice was reportedly present when Ferguson called a journalist to manage the narrative around Epstein, attempting to walk back public criticism and saying she would not want to hurt him by saying something untrue. If Beatrice witnessed that call, if she understood what her mother was doing, then her mortification at these revelations takes on a different dimension. This isn't just about learning that her parents knew Epstein. It is about realizing how deeply her mother was invested in protecting him and what her mother may have used to secure his protection in return. What hasn't dropped yet? The emails that have surfaced so far are just a fraction of the files released under the Epstein Files Transparency Act. Millions of pages. Hundreds of thousands of images. And what is already public has caused this level of damage to the York family, this level of fracture between Ferguson and her daughters, this level of public outrage and royal crisis. The question that sits at the end of all of this is what the unreleased correspondence looks like. If this is only what's public, what does the rest contain? Ferguson hiding in the UAE, allegedly in emotional collapse. Her daughters reportedly keeping their distance. Her charity shut down. Her royal connections severed. The palace walls that once protected her completely dissolved. This is what accountability looks like when it finally arrives, not through a legal process or a formal investigation, but through the slow, relentless release of documentation that tells a story no one can spin away. Conclusions. The central question this story raises is one that has no clean answer. Were Beatrice and Eugenie dragged into a financial desperation scheme they didn't fully understand by a mother whose judgment was completely overwhelmed by debt? Or were they adults operating inside a network that had normalized its own dysfunction so thoroughly that no one could see clearly anymore? The emails don't give us a definitive answer. They give us fragments, implications, a pattern that points toward something deeply wrong without spelling out exactly what it was. What is clear is that the Ferguson who wrote those emails, who called Epstein her pillar and her legend, who joked about marriage and offered to arrange access and shared intimate details about her children with a convicted predator, is not the version of herself she has ever presented publicly. The gap between those two versions of Sarah Ferguson is where this entire story lives. And as more documents continue to surface, that gap is only going to get wider. For Beatrice and Eugenie, the pain of this moment is the pain of finally understanding something they may have sensed for years, but never wanted to fully acknowledge. Their mother's choices were not just mistakes. They were patterns. And those patterns had consequences that are still unfolding today. The collapse from within may be the most honest thing the York family has produced in years.